to a very special episode of the Illusion of Consensus podcast, hosted by myself, Rav Arora, and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. Today, I'm here for a one-on-one interview with Dr. Andy Galpin, who is a professor of kinesiology at California State University. He is someone who has become incredibly influential and informative online over the past several years, doing a lot of top podcasts and communicating very complex topics on health, fitness, sleep, and recovery in a very powerful and easy to understand way. Andy is someone who I've been following for a long time, going back to when I wanted to become a professional soccer player, losing weight, optimizing performance, nutrition, sleep. He had a great series with Andrew Huberman on health, fitness, sleep, recovery, weight loss, building muscle that I learned a lot from and helped a lot of people. And Andy's just someone I've been looking up to for a long time, and I've learned a lot of important insights. So I'm very happy to have him on. Thanks for being here, Andy.
I appreciate it, man. I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, you. I don't know if you recognize this, but you actually have a pretty interesting, zealous, kind of strong young male fan base, which I came to learn for the first time recently.
I'm not sure what you mean. I have a pretty good split male-female demographic, but I don't know what
I'm sure it. Just in what I've encountered, like I was recently on a 1 month trip in Europe, and I met this one individual, Nick from Minnesota, and we were just talking about podcasting, and we had queued up this podcast a couple months ago. I'd mentioned I was going to have you on, and he was like, "Oh my God, Andy Galpin!" Like, "Oh, he's just like influenced, me and so many other people around me." And I think he's pre-med student. A lot of individuals in that, college or post-college, a lot of people who look up to you. So it's great to see that.
Oh, I understand now. That's great to hear. Well, shout out to Nick.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I have a lot of questions for you. A lot of interesting topics to talk about. I mean, this is, you and Huberman did a very long series on a lot of different things. And I'm sure we could do 20 different podcasts on 20 different things, but I guess one area where we can start, and just kind of starting off generally, is just having listened to you on many different areas: sleep, performance, nutrition, environment, and myself trying to learn more and more things about my health and looking at just so many different variables. It feels like it can be fairly overwhelming at times. And I just wrote down this quick list of things I'm thinking about, things I've been thinking about over the past year and investigating and researching. And there's just so many different variables, like everything from, gut microbiome, nervous system regulation, the mental health world, how that plays into that, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, fight or flight, protein intake, vitamin D, herbal supplements, vitamin mineral levels, sleep time, sleep efficiency, HRV, potentially toxic or forever chemicals in cookware, toothpaste, soap, shampoo, bathroom cleaners. Learned some stuff about that recently. Environmental toxins, sperm counts. There's some interesting research on that. EMF radiation from phones and AirPods, headpieces, tap water, hard water, chlorine and fluoride in your water. And this is just a very short list of many, many things. And, I've heard this phrase of sometimes some people can major in the minors and they can get overly fixated in the little things. One thing I've learned from you, from just hearing you talk about many different things, sometimes the minors are very important, and sometimes the minors could be the majors in your case. And there's just so many different things. I've just listed off a few. I could list off 20 other things. These are, I think, more so things that I'm thinking more about recently. Things like, I don't know if I said this already, but cookware and nonstick frying pans, and learning recently about PFSAs, PFOAs in nonstick cookware. And I recently just threw out a bunch of frying pans that I realized that the nonstick lining on there potentially could be harmful because it had been scratching off for a while. And I just got some new cookware from this great brand called Our Place that does great nonstick toxin-free cookware. That's just one thing that I never would have thought 5 years ago. And now I'm spending 5 hours researching cookware, and I just got that in line. And now there's 10 other things to think about, from my hard water, maybe getting a water softener, and what about chlorine and fluoride, and what about gut microbiome and herbal supplements and my vitamin D levels. I recently learned that probably a big reason why I was getting sick very frequently as a kid was low vitamin D levels, especially being someone of darker skin color. my family being from India, where it's far warmer than it is here in Western Canada, here in Vancouver. It's kind of like a sort of evolutionary mismatch of, having ancestry from a certain area where you're acclimated to very warm weather, and then being here in wintertime, where I remember in elementary school, like K to 6, like every winter, just horrible flus, vomiting, just insane. And like my friends, my Caucasian friends, never having to suffer from that. And recently a doctor pointed out to me on the podcast that it could be due to low vitamin D levels, being someone of a darker skin color, potentially. Anyway, I guess this is just a way to start off a conversation of like, do you ever find that it's incredibly overwhelming, like looking at just so many different variables? Like sometimes is it difficult to look at all these different things and try to manage kind of what's in your control and what's not? Like how do you kind of think about just all these incredibly diverse host of variables that can impact our health and performance?
Well, number one, the idea that majoring in the minors is detrimental to some people is certainly true. And I will reiterate this as long as my career stands. The overwhelming majority of people can get the 80-20. So it says you can get 80% of the benefits from 20% of the effort if you manage exercise, eat quality food, have great relationships, get outside, drink water, have a sense of purpose. Lifestyle factors are 100% it. So I want to make it clear that if anyone feels like they're stuck, whether that is they're suffering from, they feel like less energy than they should have, or their sleep isn't great, their physical appearance isn't what they want, they're not as strong as they used to be, whatever your ailment is, right? We typically say people care about three things from our end of the spectrum. That is, number one, how they look, number two, how they feel, and number three, how they perform. And those definitions are different for everyone. So people want to look different ways. Fine, but you still somewhat care about how you look. Number two, you want to feel certain ways. Everyone wants to feel differently. Some people want to feel energetic. Some people want to feel more calm. Some people want to feel more focused. Some people want to feel more free. Whatever. You want to feel a certain way mentally and physically. Then you want to perform a certain way. Again, whatever that is to you. Some people that actually mean perform on the soccer pitch. Some people that might mean perform as a better leader, as a better parent. They want to perform better in the gym. They want to be stronger. They want to have better endurance, whatever it is, right? So it's endless, but really I boil it down to those three areas. And so I really want to make sure that it is clear to people, you can get better in all three of those areas by only paying attention to a handful of things. If you're feeling overwhelmed, or you actually are in a position where resources are limited, whether that is your time or money or access, you 100% don't need any of these little things. You can be a very, very, very healthy, happy person without ever throwing away your cookware, right? Those things are minor, and they are never going to be as important as those bigger global things. That is 100% true. And so I don't ever want my material or the things I talk about to come off as making people feel less hopeless. The idea is it should be feeling like more empowered, that you can make changes. And I promise you, if you just eat quality foods some of the times, and you try to move a little bit more, you try to have a better relationship and feel more, you will definitely see major, major, major benefits. So That is true. But now we can sort of move on to the second part of your equation. What I have done over my career is solve the problem you just laid out. This is what we have done for a very long time with our high-performing athletes. This is what we've done and continue to do with our executive clients, our moms, our grandmas, our industry leaders, our entrepreneurs, our executives, all of these people. This is exactly what we do. We put people through my coaching company. It's called Rapid Health and Performance. And we take typically about 2 months, and we collect everything. I want to know everything that goes on or in your body, including some of the things you just mentioned. We're running environmental scanners of your bedrooms.
Yeah.
I don't know, your water, your toothpaste, like all these things, right?
Oh, really? You do water and with toothpaste and like those. Okay. Interesting.
Dude, I said we want to know everything that goes on or in your body. We track and measure. We want to know how that all is functioned, or all that turns into function. So how is it all processed and metabolized? So we're taking blood and urine and stool and saliva and hair and sweat. And we're seeing how that all makes you function. We have the most advanced, by a long shot, sleep technology in the world. We have the most advanced analytics for human performance. We're measuring the size of every muscle on your body. We're looking at your ability to perform, your mental health, your CO2 tolerance, your cycle. All of this is being accounted for. So you don't have to. And so all of that is done by my team and our group. And then all of that comes back to us. And we then are able to generate very specific, individualized programs for you. And so the idea is we collect an enormous amount of data. You do not need all these data, but we collect them all so that we can give you very precise, very simple solution plans, because we're able to identify what we call what are your most severe performance anchors. So what is it? So in your particular case, maybe it was the microplastics. Fine. For someone else, maybe it has. That's not like it. I'm not saying it's fake, but it might be 50th on their list of most important things for them to do. So we're not even going to pay attention to that.
Right.
Yet.
And you test exactly microplastics. That's one of your tests that you would do.
We're not missing anything for the most part, because this has been microplastics was one random example that you sort of picked out. But we don't leave anything to chance. We don't leave anything to guesswork. So we built this on our model of having worked with professional athletes, the highest paid athletes in every sport, to which it's sort of the idea is we have money, but we do not have time, and we do not have a second chance. Right? There are no second chances in a Super Bowl. There is no second chances in the Olympics. There's no second chances in world championship fights or contract renewals or whatever the case is, right? So if I have a chance to close a $100 million business deal, I have to perform perfectly that day. There is no second chance. There is no okay. And so what would it look like if that was the situation? And we've been doing that for a very long time. And then a couple of years ago, we were able to make that into a model for the everyday person, for the athletes as well as the person. So that's how we handle it. And we put that all together for you, and then able to bring together a system that says, okay, for you, maybe it is your vitamin D and you need this particular type of breath work and this type of exercise. And another person, there's different emphases. So breath work, daily routine, technology, nutrition, down to the micronutrient, supplementation, recovery, sleep. All this is very precise based on the individual, their physiology, their needs, and their anchors. And so your opening question of how do people manage that, that's what we do, man, is we make those things very, very simple so people can just worry about playing games. They can just worry about, playing football better, or they can just worry about running their company, and they don't have to wonder, like, maybe there's some mold in my bedroom, or maybe there's something going on in my gut microbiome, or maybe this mineral is high or low. You don't have to worry about it because we're going to manage all that for you.
Right. I didn't plan on asking about this, but I'd heard about your very extensive sleep test, which is very intriguing to me. Something I might try at some point. Couple of quick logistical questions. Is that for your company? Is that only for American citizens, or do you do I'm in Canada, Canadians or Australians or people in other countries?
Right now, Absolute Rest is the name of that sleep company. Right now, that is only available in the U.S.
Okay.
Some of our services, like our full coaching program and our blood work programs as well, are going to be available outside of the U.S. very, very soon, like in the next few weeks. Depending on when this is released, they may be out already.
Oh, really?
But right now we can actually do sleep everywhere else, but we can't clinically diagnose medical sleep disorders in other countries at this point.
Sorry, you said you can only do sleep tests in the U.S.?
As of right now, because we're only legally allowed to clinically be able to diagnose sleep disorders in the U.S., but we're actually able to do the sleep stuff anywhere. It's just we don't have the legal ability to diagnose disorders in other countries yet. Okay,
sorry, just so I'm following. You can do the sleep test in other places, but you just can't diagnose afterwards? Like if someone wants to do sleep tests in Toronto?
Do it. We can technically do it, but it's not a service we offer outside of the U.S. right now.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. And when it comes...
So you can't buy it yet.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting. In the next few weeks, you said, depending on when this podcast releases, and we'll leave the link, we'll leave the information below for people who want to follow. It's interesting that's going to be released. It's a very interesting time. Is it? And again, this is kind of a weird logistical question, but is this something that's, let's say, potentially easily accessible or affordable for kind of average people, or is this more sort of on the higher end sort of things for purchasing?
Well, right now, rapid health and performance is not something I would call affordable at all. I mean, you can just go back to what I said about what it is.
Yeah.
And you can just start running quick math. There's no way that's going to be
that sounds
$5,000, $2,000 program, right? That's just no way. It's
gotcha.
A year of coaching and all that stuff. But that said, our blood work company, which is Vitality Blueprint, that right now, this is July 18th, is only available in the US. But I expect in the next few weeks, we will absolutely be worldwide with that thing. So that will be something, and that is very, very, very affordable. Like 3 figures.
Yeah, good to know.
Very, very affordable for a lot of people. And then our sleep company also will be available. So right now, most of our people go through our elite program for absolute rest, and that is a little more expensive. But we just opened up a program called Sleep Lens, and that's the same thing. That is a much more affordable. Right now, it is still FDA approved. We can clinically diagnose sleep disorders. We can set up an equivalent clinically FDA approved sleep lab in your room.
Yeah, I've heard of that. For
a very small price. It's about right now about 1/5 or 20% of the price of a sleep study that you would go into a sleep lab to do.
Yeah,
and we do that. So depends on how you want to define affordable, but relative to our elite program, much, much, much cheaper.
Yeah, and the blood work you're talking about, that's in the 3 figures. Is that like how extensive is that? Like I'm recently learning like what my primary care physician is getting me tests to do for blood work is often just checking for diabetes and for cholesterol, like very basic things. It's not at all comprehensive, and even certain companies or certain tests that are comprehensive, like I'm learning things about genetic tests and the motherfucker gene, like that's like a thing. Vitamin D, microplastics, like it's just. Like, is it sort of like as much as you can, or is there different levels of testing that you do?
Yeah, no. So that company only offers one thing, and that's right now that is you're not going to find anywhere even close to as comprehensive of testing as Vitality, not even close. So right now, that's going to come with well over 100 direct biomarkers. So a lot of times when you look at other companies, they'll say 40 biomarkers, and our ultimate package is 44 biomarkers or something. But really, they're measuring like 20 some, and then they're running some calculations, and they're doing some other things. So we're going to be able to directly test over 100 markers, and then we're going to be able to run over 200,000 calculations based on that. So it is by a country mile,
wow,
the most extensive. And a couple of things that also make it different. Number one, we do not sell therapies, specifically medications, on the back end. So we are not a growth hormone clinic. We're not a telehealth where you can come to us and get your testosterone because you want to go on it. We do not do that at all. I'm not against those, but that's not the company that we have. What we do is put you through that type of testing, and then we actually have a full breakdown and analysis of what all that means. And so it's not the biomarkers. Other companies, you can run around and be like, well, which markers? And well, number one, we're going to be twice as detailed as anybody else for sure, but it is the back end. So imagine you get your results. Now what? And that's where it's either here, take testosterone or take, some very open and loose recommendations. What we're going to do is give you very, very detailed software and analysis of saying, this is what this stuff means. This is how to interpret it. And you're interpreting it not based on a sick population. So you're going to be looking at what we call performance ranges. And so it's not blood glucose relative to your risk of heart disease 65 years from now. It is clinically deficient or low or high. It is suboptimal, and this is still underperforming physiology. And so we're not going to have rudimentary cutoffs. So be like, well, you're just kind of not sick yet. So good luck, Rav. Like, you're out of here.
Yeah.
You're going to get a real understanding of this is suboptimal for performance. It's not a clinical disease, but this is where you're at. And then this is exactly how you fix it. So you can choose and build your own plan based on if you want to do no supplements, fine. You want to do this whole thing through food, great. You can build a nutrition plan based from food alone. You want to do this from exercise, great. You want to do it from food, but you want low carb, great. You want to do it from food, but you're vegan, great. And you can build your solution based on your unique physiology and your goals and lifestyle and outcomes. So it's that side of our equation that that no one can even come close to touching us on. So getting blood work done is not particularly hard, but what the hell does it mean? How is this explaining anything? And then what do I do about it? That's where we've really become unique.
Right. And your blood work, does it test for the various genetic markers, like the motherfucker gene?
No.
Does it do that?
Okay. No. So that's what I mean. It is purely blood work. It's not genetic testing. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why. First and foremost, the overwhelming majority of that field is complete garbage. In terms of, it is 99% of what I hear people say and talk about is utterly useless. MTHFR is a great example for that. That is not nearly as important as most people think. Not even close. We actually have, I covered this in my podcast. The episode's not out yet, but you can go over all of the data on this, pull every single paper up here. I'm not saying it's fake, but I'm certainly saying, though, it is massively overblown in terms of interpretation. The quick answer there is something like your polymorphism for MTHFR is going to explain somewhere in the neighborhood of 1% or so of your homocysteine level. 1% of the variance there. When I can just directly measure homocysteine. I don't need to know what your thing is. Why not just directly measure homocysteine? If I do that in addition to a handful of other strategic vitamin and mineral markers, I know exactly what's going on. So rather than worrying about, okay, did you potentially have a polymorphism that explains a single-digit percentage of the variance of this thing anyways? And then also, by the way, genes don't mean anything until they're actually activated and turned on. Why mess around with that and charge you $100 for that when I could just go literally spend all that money directly measuring what's going on in your homocysteine, put you on a program of your choosing, and see if anything changed and mattered. If not, fine. If you want to look at genetic markers for long-term risk of huge diseases, that's a different conversation. Fine, there's some real stuff there. But personalized nutrition and exercise right now from genetic markers is a load of shit for the most part. And those data are so extensive and so well published, but they are just completely ignored by the people who want to misrepresent this stuff. Again, the research area is not fake, but it is severely misrepresented.
Right.
So no, I don't care that much at all about your MTHFR variant at all. Because I can, whatever problem you're trying to solve, I can solve it anyways, for the most part, with actually just looking at, but the phenotype will always trump genotype. It doesn't matter. All right? Like, look, tell me what's actually the state of your physiology. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me how you're performing. Tell me your symptoms. And then I'm going to go solve those problems if I have to. But if you have the wrong variant for MTHFR and you're feeling great, your recovery's fantastic, your energy's awesome, then what am I doing? We're just upselling you $100 because I can get you sold on a biohacking thing, which is not, I don't want to be like overly push this point here, but that's the overwhelming majority of what people are doing with genetic testing stuff. Not to say there's nothing there from a medical perspective. Again, there is some stuff, but from the performance optimization, you can't change your genes anyways. So you should go downstream to see what the net result is nonetheless. And all of this over 1% of variance, get out of here.
Right. And, on this point, now I'm reading off of pull this article up. This whole point that you hear a lot about, that there's a gene mutation that interrupts the body's ability to convert folic acid into methylfolate. And this occurs in about 45% of the population. And, folic acid is a man-made synthetic compound. And starting in the early 90s, grains, flours, breads, and rice were sprayed with folic acid.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll stop you there. You're not reading a scientific article right now.
No, I'm not.
So we're done there, right? Like that's not science. And I can tell by the way that they phrased that stuff, and I can tell how quickly they got into this is trying to sell you on some idea or aspect of grains being negative, or like we're already done. And I know this because also in the first sentence they misconstrued what's happening, and so I could tell the illegitimacy of what's going on, and they're certainly were trying to get to a narrative. And I was waiting in my head, going, okay, how long until some stupid shit comes out of this? All right, boom, like sentence 4. It took that long to get to clear dysfunction. So if you have a little bit of scientific literacy in these areas, it's very easy to pull out the nonsense. In that particular case, yeah, sure, that first point was true. This seems to be prevalent in half the population or so, which actually sort of proves the opposite. That never proves. It suggests the opposite. If it's that common, right? Like, you're probably not aware of the difference between a polymorphism and a mutation, a rare mutation, right? When something happens at that high of a percentage, typically the things that are actionable are happening at less than 1% of the population. Rare mutations, not polymorphisms, are where the action really is. And by definition, that means less than 1%. So if something's happening in half of us, not really sure that is actually important. And I can give you a very specific and even more.
So I don't fully follow yet. So what are you suggesting? Like, if it was truly in half the population, then you're saying we would see different?
It could be, but then clearly it doesn't matter that much, is the point, right?
Okay.
So imagine if you found that was the case in less than 1% of the population. And in that less than 1%, something interesting was happening. Great. But now you're saying it's in basically half the population, which is to say, okay, so half of us now are vitamin B deficient? Tell me how that would make teleological sense. It wouldn't, right? So that's your alarm bell number one. The fact that it's that prevalent indicates it's probably not going on. That's not enough information right there to make a conclusion, but it should go off alarm bells because, again, most of the things that are actionable from genetic testing perspective happen in small percentage of the populations. Again, these would be called rare mutations, less than 1%. So that's point number one. Then again, look at point number two, which is not in the article, but I guarantee not. If you run that further analysis and you say this is in 45% of those 45% of the people that have that mutation, how many of them are actually homocysteine or vitamin B irregular? And now the numbers get to very low. And so the correlation then is saying, of those people, if you take that 45% of people, how many of them will have dysfunctional or suboptimal homocysteine concentrations? That genetic marker will explain about 1 to 3% of the resulting homocysteine level. It's not telling you anything. If your vitamin D or homocysteine levels are high or low, it's not because of that genetic polymorphism is the point. Now, if you run a population study, you will come up with statistical significance. But in terms of practical and clinical value, it means very, very little because you could have that polymorphism and there's 99% of the other things you're doing are explaining why your homocysteine is the way that it is, if that makes sense. Right? If I give you another example, this will become really clear. Look at something like ACTN3. Okay, this is one of the genes associated with fast twitch muscle fiber concentration. Look at ACE, one of the original genetic polymorphisms associated with performance. Okay. Now you may not realize, and MTHFR is the same. When you hear something like MTHFR is deficient in 45% of people, it's not in people. The next question is, in what kind of people? In other words, has that been validated against all races? And the answer is no.
Interesting.
Okay? And when you look at this, the overwhelming majority of the genetic databases that all research is pulled for are coming from Western Europe. So markers that are validated against your German ancestry and English ancestry have not been validated against African ancestries.
Right, or my Indian
ancestry. They've not
been
validated.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Bingo, right? And in fact, many of the studies that have been done have very specifically and clearly shown these markers do not hold up across other races. They intentionally do not. And ACTN3 and ACE have been demonstrated many times. They'll explain 30 to 40% of variance in a marker in a Caucasian population and 0% in African populations. 0%. So if you look at these big genome projects that have been done in the UK and in America, that's great if you are Caucasian. If you're not, those things mean fuck all basically for you. Yeah. And so, sorry to be crude, but that's the point I'm getting at is no, why was that not in sentence 2 or sentence 3? That article. That's not that. So that's what I mean when I'm saying these things are really overblown. This is what I'm talking about. Not validated against, and then specifically, you look at Southeast Asian populations. It's not the same. We know how these compare to German. In fact, there's been studies on looking at, I think it was actually Norwegian or Finnish populations, the same markers against Germans, both Caucasians, and they didn't hold up across both.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
So this is what I mean. Like, you can find a population association at a very low level if you get enough bodies in there. But does this really explain it for humans?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Hi, everyone. A quick word from our first and exciting sponsor, Alchemy Elements. Alchemy Elements is a powerful adaptogenic supplement. For those of you who don't know, adaptogens are a class of plant compounds, primarily herbs and mushrooms, which can help build the mind and body's resistance to stress. Alchemy Elements contains a very unique and carefully selected blend of 9 adaptogens, such as lion's mane, cordyceps, polygalaroot, and shilajit, and they can help boost energy, boost your immunity, and increase focus and overall stabilize your mood. It can have a wide array of effects, which can often depend from individual to individual, but it's a great way to start your morning and generally increase your focus and your energy levels. You can just pour 1 scoop of Alchemy Elements into your morning coffee or your protein shake or smoothie, and you're off to the races. It's a great way to start the day. I use it every day. I find that it can generally stabilize my mood levels and increase focus, especially if I want to get a big project done or finish a very important task. Alchemy Elements often is a great way to kind of start and get my focus going and get me primed for whatever task I want to accomplish. We're very excited and very happy to work with Alchemy Elements. We've been working with them for a couple of months, and now in this new iteration of the podcast, we're going to continue our relationship, which is very special to us because Alchemy aligns with our mission and values of individuals taking greater ownership of their personal mental and physical health and relying less and less on corrupt and flawed generalized kind of medical advice, and less reliance on pharmaceutical drugs, and more of a general interest and focus on holistic health. For a limited time, Illusion of Consensus readers and listeners can get 10% off their first order using the code word Illusion, or 30% off a subscription monthly order, where you can get a monthly shipment of Alchemy Elements delivered to you. For the subscription orders, you can also get with it a bonus gold kit to store your Alchemy Elements. Overall, I think Alchemy is a fantastic product. I highly recommend you check them out in the link below in this podcast, wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple, Substack, Rumble, or YouTube. Just go to the link, use the code word Illusion, and you can get your discount and you won't regret it. Now, just to clarify, so what I was reading was from Gary Brecka. He was on Rogan. It was a summary of things that he said. We don't have to talk about the person per se. I've heard some interesting things from him, and I've seen Lane Norton attempt to debunk a number of things. I unfortunately do not have the scientific literacy to figure out kind of what's
It's exactly a very easy one.
Pardon?
I think you just got a little snippet of it. I didn't have any idea who you were reading from. That took me all of 2 sentences.
Yeah, and that can be and that can be challenging. Like, hearing some things from Gary Brecka, hearing Lane Norton say something else, and Huberman, and you say certain things. It can be difficult for the average person to figure out what's right. Like, things like microplastics, EMF radiation, seed oils. I used to have more of a negative view on seed oils. I'm becoming a little more convinced that maybe that those concerns are overhyped. But at the same time, people that I respect, like this guy Max Lugavere, I'm going to have on my podcast, talk about dangers of seed oils. But then I hear Lane Norton making a lot of sense and saying there isn't good randomized controlled evidence on the harms of seed oils. So it's like it can be very hard to navigate these very complex topics.
Yeah, well, the world is needing of more work, right? So we are never all the way at the end of the answer. Genetics, not to go back to it, but it is a great example. I'm not also arrogant enough to think we know all the answers there. It is clearly a moving and evolving field. Seed oils, the same thing, right? So the best you can do is say, what do we know right now based on the current available evidence? If you listen to somebody like Lane or Andrew speak, and there's only so many times you can finish your sentences with, based upon what we know right now. Right? So at some point you just stop saying it, but it should be implied into everything we're saying always. Any good scientist will say that based on what we know now, based on the current available evidence, this is where we're at, right? That is an implicit and something that needs to be explicit part of communication of science, is to really make sure we get things there. In terms of understanding, I have a video on my YouTube. I made a smaller one and then a larger one. The shorter one's maybe 10 minutes or 5 minutes or something. The longer one's like a couple hours maybe. And it's called Bulletproof Bullshit Detection. And it's not actually what one would think it to be, but it was really my attempt to say, this is how you can set yourself up with a framework so that things like this don't get confusing. In other words, it's how to distill and differentiate the quality of scientific evidence. And it's not the standard, meta-analysis is at the top of the pyramid. It's none of that. It's my actual practical guide for how I think through these fields. Because remember, I got to think through the same stuff you do. I don't do pseudo research, not in my lab.
Yeah.
Right. But clearly this is something I need to be aware of. So I'm also not just going to follow whatever Lane Norton says. I'm not going to follow whatever Max says. And they're both, by the way, friends of mine. So it's my breakdown of how I actually navigate my own self as a scientist, as a coach, and as a human for my own health through those fields. And I can share a little bit of that now if you'd like, but it's a challenge that you'll never get perfect. And that's okay.
Yeah, and I don't know, like we don't have to go into exact specifics here, but and I have a lot of very specific questions to ask. But since we're on this point, like, do you often find yourself in strong disagreement with the kind of the Gary Breckas of the world, various influencers in the health and fitness space who are talking about seed oils, methylation, methylated B vitamins, methylated multivitamin, et cetera, red light therapy? Do you often find that there's some very strong disagreements you would have with those kind of people?
Yeah, of course. I have disagreements with Lane. I have disagreements with Andrew. I have disagreements with Max. Like, I also have disagreements with myself in terms of things that I thought were the right answer a year ago, 5, 10 years ago. I've changed positions on, right? I don't think that is the thing we should be concerned about. Right. One example is in the video, I would cover things like this. Okay. Now, Max comes from a different perspective, a different lens. His academic background is different, and his audience and his personal scientific interest is different. Right. Same with me, same with Lane, same with Andrew. We're all speaking to someone. I am working with different people than Lane is working with, and Max and all these people. That's number one. That said, not a single one of those people I would ever be concerned about going on. I've been on Max's show, right? I would do anything with them. I would engage with them publicly because they're not bad actors. They're not bad people. They're not in it for the wrong reasons. Other people, I have been invited on their shows, and I will not go on their shows, right? I will not sell products with them. I've been asked to join their companies. And these are multiple 7-figure offers. And there's no way, because they're not good people. They're not genuine. They're not, being wrong is fine, right? I've been wrong. Lane's been wrong. Max, Andrew, we've all been wrong. We're going to be wrong again. I have zero concern with that. But are you wrong for the right reasons? Right? That is a fundamental difference, right? And I don't believe any of those people are, again, I'll just call them bad actors. The other people, the only ones I care about are bad actors. I was just in Malibu last week with my friend Darren Olin. Darren's got a best-selling book out there. He's got a great Netflix series. Okay, I disagree with Darren on an enormous number of things. An enormous number. And I'll still hug that guy as hard as I'll hug anybody else like I did last week. He's not a bad person. He's not in it for the wrong reasons. He's not doing other stuff. And so if you look around at the people that I interact with, it's only because, as best I can tell, they are in this for the right reasons. They're just seeing the data differently. They doing whatever. Other folks, I guess I get the questions like, why haven't you been on? And you could fill in names here. And I'm like, well, there's a reason. You think it's not because I haven't been invited. It's like I'm not associating with those people who are doing those things. It's not because they sell things. I sell things. Whatever, right? It doesn't because they don't. It's just simply, are they actually genuinely trying to be truthful? And I'm telling you, many of the people in the, we'll just say biohacking space, I've interacted with a lot of them. Yeah. They're not, like, if there was hidden tapes, I'm telling you people, the person you love, the guy, the girl, the things I've heard them directly say, not about topics, but I mean things like they don't give a shit about the consumer. It is what will sell the next. Like, they really don't care about, it's that type of stuff I'm talking about. Just complete and utter lack of ethics. And they're just trying to get the next thing to go to me. And they do not care at all about that stuff. Unfortunately, those people tend to do very well financially.
Yeah.
And they tend to get out in front of people. So it's the big names for the most part. And so I will not associate with those people for any amount of money.
Yeah. And are you ever willing to debate anyone that you would very strongly disagree with?
Not interested at all.
Or is there certain criteria of someone who you could debate? Like if you had a disagreement with Lane, I assume you guys would talk about it if you were interested.
Yeah, we do all the time.
Yeah. Have you guys done that publicly, you and Lane?
Yeah. We did it on a show many years ago.
Okay. So I should check that out.
But like I would do his. In fact, if you want to go back a long time ago, when there was a documentary that came out, Joe asked me about this. He wanted to get some people on to talk about it was like a vegan documentary. And I was like, I'm telling you, Joe, you do not want to have a debate on there. And I told him,
sorry, Joe who?
He's like, okay, cool.
Joe who?
Rogan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then he ended up doing it. He had a couple of people come on and debate. He did it 2 or 3 times. And then he was like, dude, you're right. Like, this is not the format. This is not the approach. There's a reason scientists don't do debates like that. Number I could share with you, but the short answer is you're not going to find out who has the best information. What you're going to find out who's the most skilled in the art of debate. Now, honestly, I'm telling you right now, I'm very good at it. But so I'm not like worried about that part of it. But it's not the right format. What you want, honestly, is the classic scientific approach. You take as much time as you want, and you write out and you reference and you cite your best possible argument. Then I'll do the same, and we can do a couple of rounds of that. So everyone's clear. You're not rushed. You're not panicked. You didn't get nervous. We don't have those like, oh, I slipped up. I said the wrong thing because I was so much pressure. Right. What you're seeing is who can handle pressure, who's a better public speaker, who can memorize their lines better, who's quicker-witted. And that's not necessarily what we're trying to get at here. What we're trying to get at is whose argument is stronger. That is much better done, calm, focused. Let me double check. I want to make sure I'm accurate. I know it's boring, but when you ask me, that's why I'll never debate somebody. It's not the best approach. I'll argue with somebody, no problem. Honestly, I'm sounding as arrogant as I've ever sounded in my life on this stuff, but like I'm good at that stuff. But that's not the best way for you. That's not the best way for me. That's not the best way for me to set my argument out there. It's not the best way for me to learn about their argument.
Right.
The world's not going to move forward that way. So no, I wouldn't have not interested. I've been invited a bunch of times. I'm not interested at all in that.
Yeah. You're saying there'd be no scenario where a podcast debate, say 3-4 hours on some platform where you're debating things on health and fitness. You're saying there's no scenario that you think would be
probably none
conducive to illuminating difficult information? No,
again, because for other reasons, you're not going to get out what the listener wants, and I wouldn't get out what I want, and the person I'm debating wouldn't get out what they want.
Yeah,
I'd much rather do a formal like write your piece out.
Yeah,
that
does seem like the better way.
And
that does sound like a better way.
Better.
Yeah. That I think that is way better. But I have seen it done well, like not in your field, but in the field of archaeology of all fields. Rogan did a recent debate, Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble. Flint Dibble, more of a conventional archaeologist. Graham, who's been a journalist writing about these things, they did a 4.5 hour debate. A lot of complexity, a lot of confusion, a lot going on, a lot of heated moments. But it was very educational as a listener to see that play out. There was another one with Eric Weinstein and Terrence Howard on quantum physics and things that are just way beyond anything I can understand, complex mathematics, different geometrical equations, etc. And at times it was very frustrating to watch, but overall it was a deeply educational experience, even if someone slipped up or there were some kind of miscommunications or very heated, controversial moments. I find those longer conversations where there's a lot of disagreement to elucidate some very difficult topics, even if you get to a certain point where someone's citing a study and the other guy hasn't heard of the study, but it's like, oh, that's interesting. I want to make a note of that and look at that study more. And maybe that person can come on again or revisit that topic and give their thoughts on that specific study. But that's just been my experience as a consumer of content.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are more interesting ways to do it rather than debate. For example, I think if you have somebody, and Gabrielle Line and I have talked about doing this, coming together and both sharing a different perspective on a topic, that is of value. After Rob Wolf and I I just remember you said that Rob and I were going to do this on Joe's show. Actually, we're going to go over nutrition from kind of a performance versus health perspective. And Rob and I have, 50 to 80% overlap. I actually don't know. And that would have been great because it would have been like, this is what we agree on. Here are the terms we like. What do you disagree on? What do you disagree on? That would have been I'm not a business partner with Rob, so there's no thing, but I think things like that are much more interesting because a debate is just going to be me trying to win at all times. There's no learning trying to happen there. Someone like that exchange would be like, okay, great. Let's set the record straight. Let's clarify terms. Let's get on the same page here. I push back on this. You push back. Great. There's an opportunity to learn and for the audience to hear both sides of an equation. But a true debate it's not the best format.
I sense this conversation is going in a bit of a different direction, which I'd actually initially planned. And then afterwards, I had a lot of specific questions on diet, sleep, nervous system, and performance. But I think we're going to revert to our initial plan, which we talked about. And maybe that's another podcast to talk more about specifics on diet and overall health and sleep. But I know we spoke a little bit before starting about the nature of consensus. This relates more specifically to my podcast. When it comes to the nature of consensus in your field, do you ever feel like that oftentimes, or in some specific cases, that there are areas of very strong consensus, whether I'm particularly more interested academically, sort of within the institutions, because that's often it's a little bit different than sort of self-styled health gurus online, although both can be weighed equally depending on where you go. There's many people who follow various people who have no academic credentials and say a lot of sensational things on health, fitness, or vaccines or whatever, and they have so much power and authority. But it's in some ways you could say the people in the major institutions wield a lot more power and affect the scientific review process in journals and what gets approved, what's FDA approved, what the CDC recommends, etc. Do you often find that there are these kind of difficult, very stiff barriers of consensus that are hard to penetrate or to break down because a lot of people have vested interests, or it's, I've heard of many people talk about how it takes many years, sometimes decades, to change something in a medical textbook, and sometimes things that we know aren't true in that textbook, the textbook is still taught because it's hard to change the medical textbook over time. Yeah,
I mean, that's a lot to react to. Yes, in terms of consensus statements, there's a ton of stuff that I think within, whether it's the sleep field, the nutrition field, the performance or exercise physiology fields, there's a lot of things that I think are in a general consensus that are good. In addition to, I've written textbooks and textbook chapters. I've done certification stuff through major organizations, not like local, pay me and be certified by me, through national accredited organizations. And it is hard and slow to change those things, but I think you want that. No, I won't say think. You definitely want that. Mm-hmm. Institutions should be slow to change. 100% they should be. That's actually in our best interest. And we could certainly talk about why, but do you actually have logistic issues there? You have feasibility issues. Think about it this way. Imagine if you change your textbook every couple of years, and now you're making all of your students buy all new textbooks every other year. When instead, my students are able to buy the same textbook that is $650, they can buy it used for $38. You're saving thousands of dollars a life. And if you're talking about throwing something out that is a couple of lines in a 700-page textbook, you tell me what's really best for the world. I'm going to tell you right now, my students are all going to line up we come from an extremely diverse, very wide range of socioeconomical status in my university. I'm telling you, every single one of them would line up in the line that says, I'll take a couple of missing the lines. I'll keep them if I can save all this money on all my books. Yeah. So practically, it's not like some big... I feel like in the podcastistan world, it's like they think all these scientists are just trying to protect all their personal checks coming in. It's not that. Yes, of course, there are some cases of that happening. The overwhelming majority of people, that's not the case. It is things like this. And it is going okay, well, who's going to go change that chapter? I don't want to do it. Right. You want to go do that? I don't go do that. I got other shit I'm trying to do. It's not it's not the, hey, I'm trying to save my face. No, it's just like, I don't want to do that. Who wants to do that? Who wants to go edit that? Who wants to review that chapter? Who wants to resubmit it? You want to send it back to the printers? You want, like, I don't want to do that shit. So who's doing it? We're just people. And those are not our jobs. Our jobs are other things. Textbooks and things like that, they're not part of your job. Those are things you're doing on the side. So no one has a full-time job to do that. So if it's my textbook, like I guarantee you right now, if somebody editor emailed me from a chapter that I wrote in a book 4 years ago, and I said, hey, there's been new data that come out that says, and it's something I'm not that concerned of, like, will you rewrite this chapter? Fuck no. Like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, why would I do that? No chance, right? So it's honestly, I can tell you behind the curtain, it's way more things like that than it is some big conspiracy theory, paychecks, and like, it's not that, like, we have classes to teach and projects we're trying to write and families, and like, I'm not going back to do all that stuff unless it is like legitimately we think something has really changed. And most of the time it's not that. It's something usually fairly small.
I think a lot of people over the past few years, myself included, who don't have PhDs, aren't scientists, saw the way the pandemic was handled, and my colleague Jay Bhattacharya, who is someone working at Stanford, PhD, health economics, etc., seeing the way in which misinformation is spreading from the ivory towers, from CDC, FDA, from prestigious universities, and seeing the way in which the approval on mask mandates, vaccine risks, etc., are being very wrongly and dangerously handled from the top institutions like the FDA. It's something I've reported on, very specifically things like myocarditis from the vaccine in young men. Like, why is no one talking about that? Why is it being misrepresented, etc.? Those kind of niche subjects, or like psychedelic therapy, and the FDA panel's recent rejection or recommendation against approval of MDMA therapy for PTSD, and seeing, and I covered this closely, had on my friend Matt Johnson from Johns Hopkins, who's one of the few very strong kind of truth tellers on this topic that I feel. It seems like there have been many areas that have been pointed out where we know the information is wrong. The best evidence suggests otherwise, contrary to what people at the FDA or people at certain elite scientific institutions are saying. And so there is a lot of understandable distrust and a lot of things that leading authorities are getting wrong. Now, at the same time, there's always going to be a very strong and powerful overreaction. And it's like everyone's playing a narrative in their head. And if you're running the narrative of, oh my God, I've seen FDA and CDC fuck up on this, and this, on lockdowns, masks, and vaccines. Now drinking water is killing me. Now I can't trust anything that anyone ever says. Right. No. Or you pick your certain health gurus and you might ignore what they're getting wrong. Right. So there's a real problem of misinformation from the highest leading authorities. But then there's also the countervailing problem of then people and distrusting everything. And it's like, it's always, you got to find the right balance. And some people go way too far. Like, oh, what do you mean? Like, I had this big debate with Mark Cuban, which is publicized thanks to Joe Rogan, where he's like, what do you mean? Like, why would the FDA do this? Why would this, like, what are you talking about, man? It's the FDA. Like, we can trust everything they say. And it's like, yeah, but actually, what about this, and this? And then, but on the other side, it's like, you can't trust anything FDA ever does because of these handful of mistakes or errors, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave COVID and vaccine stuff. It's not my area, but I can certainly say the nutrition side of the world had a similar issue in terms of a lot of it was self-induced from the institutions. And, you know what I mean? It's like, hey, you're whining now that other people are talking so much and getting so many followings talking about nutrition, sharing nutrition information, selling things. But yet you were way behind the data for a long time, and you refused to move. People lost trust in you, and now you're complaining because other people rose up. That was massively self-induced.
Can we give some examples on that?
Of that?
Yeah,
certainly. Yeah. So for many years, the dietitians, the registered dietitians of the world would be basically under the impression that no one can give nutrition advice besides us. And I'm being a little facetious there, but pretty close, right? And then it was like, okay, number one, why are you trying to control information that is, very ubiquitously needed for people, right? We need basic nutrition information. Number two, what are any of you doing about it? And none of you are out there with social media platforms. You're not putting out content. You're not making videos. You're not doing it. Like, none of you and again, I don't mean none, but like very few registered dietitians were out there doing these things. And if they were offering, general recommendations based on food pyramid, things like that, right? Okay, great. So then you didn't do anything to help. And then you wonder why other people rose up and took these spots over. And then when you had things like the carbohydrate and fat thing, right? So, okay, we missed the boat on that one. No doubt about it. For many, many, many years, including when I was a kid, it was carbohydrates are great and fat is really, really, really bad. And then it started to turn into the healthosphere, the functional medicine crowd. All this started saying, hey, low carbohydrate is okay and high fat is great. And then the institutions of nutrition started saying, oh, this is ketoacidosis and pushing back. And the reality of it is they were wrong, right? And it just took them a long time to finally adjust. I'm talking 30 years. And now there's so much data on, hey, ketosis is fine for many people. It's not great for performance. Probably won't ever be, but there's many places. And so what ends up happening is you're way over here in this end of the spectrum. The functional medicine side of the world pushed it way to the other end of the spectrum. And the truth is probably, 30% of the way there. It's not, carbohydrates are not the devil. They're not awful for you. They don't give you, Alzheimer's disease. They don't make you magically fat. That's not all right. That said, ketogenic diet is fine for a lot of people, especially if you don't exercise at all or minimally physically active. It seems to be actually great for some things, way more advantageous for a number of, Okay, great. And so I call that a little bit self-induced. It's like, okay, the nutrition ivory tower a little bit should have been able to come out and say, actually, there is a bunch of research on the ketogenic diet. We need more. But actually, and then I personally, when that stuff early was on, I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, I actually do find pretty low in carbohydrate personally. I've tinkered with our athletes. They're actually doing fine. But none of them were saying that because they didn't want to admit any like giving of territory to anybody else. And so it was like, well, try it. Use it on people. Have you done that? Have you ever coached? Have you ever coached anything besides eat 70% of your calories from carbohydrates? No, you haven't. So you really don't know. You aren't practitioners. You aren't doing these things over here. And so a lot of that was just self-induced. And so because of all that, it's not the fact that they're wrong. What ends up losing institutional trust is when you, number one, start attacking the other side instead of saying, oh, great, we don't have a lot of data on that. We don't think it's right, but it's this, we're going to go try this other stuff or whatever. And then number two, when the data started coming out, then you start having to open things up and start going, oh, great, we're going to change our position on this because it looks like stuff has been. I actually don't think people care that much when you just admit a little bit of wrong. It's the certainty and hubris that is going to have people lack trust on there. So I think it is
That's
fine.
an important point. Hubris, very important point.
It's fine early on to say, based on the data we have right now, we see no compelling evidence to do A, B, and C. However, we're going to keep watching. Fine. And you can continue to put those statements out. We don't, and when you see blatant misinterpretation, then fine, call that out. But then all you have to do is change your position. So that is really the only thing I ask of the institutions is just give me an honest play of the current state of the evidence. And if you're saying the evidence is minimal, but therefore we're recommending do A, B, and C, fine. But you're going based on your interpretation of the best possible evidence. Fine. It's when we step in past that. In my bullshit video, I say the same thing, but another way to think about this is where people get mad is when you either deliberately lie or make up data or misrepresent it. Okay, fine.
Yes, yeah.
But that's actually, that's more complicated than you think. Because as a scientist, it's really, really, really hard, as funny as it sounds, to agree on basic data. It's really challenging. How did you collect this? Statistical analysis. It's actually really difficult. So you can have two very competent, highly ethical people look at the same data set and disagree with how it should be sort of analyzed and interpreted. It's honestly best to leave that to the scientists because you're out of your game. Like you really don't even know what you're looking at there. That's not the conspiracy. Like that's not the level. Yes, you can just like fraudulently make up data and that does happen, but it's really pretty rare, to be honest. It's mostly the next half, which is how do you interpret those data and how do you move forward? Okay. So unless you're lying and making things up and fraudulent about the data, then okay, I'm fine, right? Moving past that, though, is when you just simply have to say that, okay, I then interpret this to mean that, therefore this is my action. And then people can make their own decision on that as much as they want to, but just don't violate number one, and I'm fine. The people I mentioned earlier, I can name a bunch of other ones. I can't think of a single instance where I've ever heard Max or Darren or anybody else like make up data, misrepresent, intentionally miscite something other than a mistake. Other people,
right?
I'm out because that's what they're doing. Right. So while I can disagree with Darren and other stuff, like I don't think that's actionable yet. That's not something I'm worried about yet. I'm not here. Okay, great. They're not violating step number one, so they're still good people in my opinion. It's the other people that are violating, just like that article you read. 2 or 3 sentences. And I saw like you already violated number one. You're misrepresenting massively what's happening here. And that's not the truth of what those data say. And no one would interpret those data to be that unless you clearly haven't read the papers or you did them enough to just falsely represent them.
Right.
So to me, like that's all that is asked. And from an institutional perspective, just be transparent about the state of the data. The evidence this is why I love websites like examine.com. I don't have any affiliation
great
with
website.
Examine.
Yeah.
But they're just going to say like the strength of the evidence is 1 or 2 or 3 or 7 or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you do whatever you want to do from there. And if you want to take action on something that we think has only been shown twice in animal model, great. And if you want to wait until there's 50 RCTs in 100,000 people, great. That's up to you. We're just going to let you know the state of the data and the evidence.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of people coming from COVID, again, that's where me as a journalist, something that I covered a lot, some very particularly niche subjects, which I already mentioned during the pandemic. A lot of people became concerned. A lot of people like myself who, weren't, not experts in any of the things, particularly that we started to investigate and discover, and just seeing like the sort of at least popular consensus. Because a couple people suggested to me that actually this is not really a consensus. This is really a consensus of sort of popular people or people in power, not like a real consensus of like,
happens.
Here's 5,000 scientists.
Happens.
And actually, although that might be the case too, that there might be like, if you polled people at Harvard and they actually would agree with whatever the CDC is saying, et cetera, or you polled epidemiologists in a certain area and 75% say this thing, but it's, for the average layperson or for a journalist looking at this critically, it's like, wait, I think the 25% might be right about that. And so I guess I have 2 questions. I'll just throw both of them at you and we can, you can go through them in order. One, what are some kind of major, I'm sure there's lots, I would presume, but what are, let's say, a couple of major areas where you feel like you deviate from kind of the 80% or 90% consensus, if at all? And then number 2, I'm curious where you've changed your mind over the past few years on some very big topics, potentially, as you were alluding to before, because I feel like during the pandemic, we saw a lot of scientists not do that. Like, hey, you were wrong about this, but like you won't admit it. You just keep doubling down. And that's the worst thing, right? You mentioned hubris. That's what sows distrust. That's what leads people to conspiracy theories, when you don't admit that you're wrong and you keep saying that you got this thing right when you didn't get it right at all. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those are challenging. I can certainly tell you, in my classes, I teach a sports nutrition class at the graduate level. Other people teach it as well. And they all sign up for my class. And I'm not saying that because I'm saying that I'm famous. What I'm saying is when they're being taught the opposite stuff in the other classes as mine, and I can go, well, here's the papers, here's the programs I've done for NFL players and Major League Baseball players, and I can just list it all on. Here's what we've done in the field. And the other folks that are teaching the classes are going, well, yeah, this is what happens. I'm like, oh, okay. Those people are basing it based on a position stand from years ago or whatever. All right. So you do have an enormous number of people in the fields that just don't really stay up to date. They don't apply it. They're not out there using it. So there are scientists and they're practitioners, and there are people like me who I clearly am still running my research laboratories. I'm also working directly. I have companies that we run in this space, and I directly have been coaching. I'm not saying I'm better than other people. But there's a different level of expertise because I can now talk to my students about, well, yeah, we've done this before. Here's what we've used before. I'm familiar with this, whatever. And others are just going like, well, theoretically, this should have A, B, and C. Oh, okay, great. Theoretically, this should work. I'm like, well, theoretically, you've never done it. So, and you don't even exercise, and you're a sports dietitian. Get out of here with what's going to work or what won't work on a race or something like that. Like, it's not gonna work.
Is it possible to go into a couple of examples where you deviate from kind of sort of dominant?
Super simple things. We mentioned carbohydrate as one, all right? Like we will generally going to be very pro carbohydrate. That said, I have plenty of athletes who do fine on moderate to low, not even ketogenic, moderate to low carbohydrate. That's great. Gut microbiome is another example. There is a lot of nonsense there. We basically don't know what we're doing in that area. That said, it's still very actionable. There's a lot of stuff you can directly test right now and really help people with. And I know that because we have literally done it thousands of times at this point.
For example?
So I don't know how much more data one would need to see there. We've run studies in my lab on it. We just finished up one, and we're going to do more going as well. So like I can directly tell you, yes, if you think you have something going on, like sure, check your doctor. But you can also, a lot of people in our field will just be like, well, that's nonsense. You can't do anything. It's all waste. It's a scam. Nope. Like it's not a scam. There's a lot of scams there for sure. There's more than not. It's not as scientifically supported as blood chemistry for sure. Blood chemistry is way like a mountain better. But that doesn't mean this other place is literally at zero. I would say that I have differed from.
And so, sorry,
I would say,
can we fix it on the microbiome thing? Is there I know this conversation's taking a bit of a different direction, but any kind of sort of looking at it from afar, any kind of couple major things that you test for gut microbiome, or a couple things that you think are very important that people should be aware about?
I would say if you don't have a very, very skilled practitioner, then I would definitely not do it at all. Okay. That's my answer to that question. Because unless you really understand how to interpret those things and analyze them, you're going to get yourself into way bigger problems than you're going to have help. Okay. So in terms of what to test for, what to look for, don't do it at all unless you really have someone that understands what they're doing. That's the simplest answer I can give you on that without getting very, very complicated very, very quickly. And it's going to blow past people.
Any major issues that you see there in that particular area with gut microbiome? Very common.
I would say like tons. Tons and tons and tons. I just had an athlete of mine that came back with cholera. So like this is something of like, oh my gosh, now I got to refer out. You need to go medical here. You need to go treat this, so and so. But this was complaining of lots of issues going on, not even just GI related ones, fatigue, low energy. And we have a lot of data on this individual. And immediately I was like, okay, I don't think A, B, and C are happening, whatever. Like we're not seeing this as sleep. You need to go get checked out. And again, GI symptoms weren't even that bad. Nothing to note there. And I'm like, something's going on in your GI. We can actually see it in blood. That's why too. We also saw it. Like, I know something's going on there. Go get this stuff done. Got the testing done. His team wouldn't take care of it, by the way. So they're like, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And I'm like, just go get it done. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Boom. Came back. He's like, I have fucking cholera. I'm like, yeah, I told you. Okay, now go with your actual doctors. It's not my lane. Refer out, that kind of thing. But it's very easy for us to identify what's going on there. We can see from immune markers tons of association there. The study we just got done looking at was actually the association between sex hormones and hormone-based birth control in female athletes and gut microbiome. And so there are lessons one can learn there about what's happening, not happening. So from a high level, the overwhelming majority of gut microbiome stuff is misinterpreted. It is missold. It is oftentimes taught as like, oh, just get this test done and we'll solve all your problems. That's not true. But again, there can be some utility there in terms of looking for a handful of different, very actionable steps there. But it gets really complicated. The one I gave you was an actual pathogen. You don't want to play with that at all. That's a medical doctor all day on that one. But the other stuff is, again, there's some action there. So if you compare that to like blood chemistry,
Yeah.
Man, blood chemistry is also something we've been talking about for a very, very long time. And most people told us that we're wasting time and disagreed with it. But the ability to get very high precision programming based upon your unique physiology and blood work is now no one can deny it. But it's something everyone told us we were idiots for doing, for a very long time. We got called all those sort of names.
Oh, really?
Now I'm like, okay.
I'm not aware of this.
Yeah, always.
Yeah.
I mean,
wow.
It's overt and it's covert. It's whispers at the conference. It's the, it's the other practitioners saying it's this sort of things. I'm like, oh, that thing's not been validated yet. We're like, okay. Where's
that coming from? Is that come from particular institutions or journals or?
It's all the above. It's other scientists. It's other practitioners. It's other coaches. It is other colleagues in the field in all of the different areas. It generally happens when you don't understand it, right? So they're just like, oh, they have a PhD in the field, or they're an RD. Not to pick on RDs, I feel like I'm doing that. They're great people, but they have something in the tangential field, and they're like, well, I know blood, and there's no way you can get that kind of information from the blood. And then I'm like, yeah, you definitely can. And then years go by, and they're like, oh yeah, and then the validation studies come, and it's like, okay, sure, you're there. So it's mostly because they didn't really understand, physiology to the level they thought they did. At least in this context, right? It's a classic medical versus performance as well, right? So there's a difference between you're medically deficient versus this is not where you'd want to be to perform at your best. Those were pillars that I stood out on for a very long time. There's some that I'm still standing on that I have not been supported yet on, and I still look like I'm wrong at, but I'm going to hold out the rest of my life on.
Like what?
This is a very minor one that I've joked about for a long time that you're not going to be super interested in, but it's called hyperplasia. So the way that a muscle grows in terms of exercise-induced muscle hypertrophy, so your muscles got bigger, there's only really two mechanisms, one of which is that each individual muscle fiber gets wider in diameter, increases in size. That's what we would call muscle hypertrophy. That is well established. The other option is you grow more individual fibers, right? That's called hyperplasia. And I have stood my entire career on the fact that I think it happens. I think it happens in response to normal exercise training. And I have zero direct evidence in humans to support that. And there's more and more and more research coming out that's sort of like, hey, maybe this is happening. But there's a lot that's like, no, it doesn't happen at all. And so this is one of the ones I just kind of like laugh at. I'm just like, I'm damn sure. Like, I think it's going on, but I wouldn't say this is exactly something that is like the most controversial thing. I'm just like, I've always been like, I'm pretty sure. I tell my kids actually for like a decade, I'm like, if you go to certification or any kind of testing and they ask you about hyperplasia, tell them, no, it doesn't happen. Get the answer correct. But I'm telling you, by the time I retire, we're going to figure out this thing is real.
Yeah.
So that's another one I love to champion.
That's awesome. We're nearing the end of our time. So two things. So on this question that I've already asked you, when it comes to say sleep, are there any areas particularly where you deviate from conventional norms on how sleep is understood?
Oh, all of it. All of it.
I've seen your sleep stuff.
Yeah. I mean, everything from a handful of things like sleep staging is complete garbage, as in the sense of how much time you spent in deep sleep versus REM sleep and all that stuff. That is all nonsense. In fact, I don't think it's going to be around very much longer.
Really?
At all.
No way.
No. I think even polysomnography, kind of the gold standard, is out. I think it's over. I think the field is past it. I don't think that gold standard will be around. I think.
And what do you mean exactly? What do you mean exactly by deep sleep versus REM sleep? Like, what do you disagree with on how it's understood?
Number one, those stages aren't real for the most part. They're arbitrary, and so what happens effectively is sleep institutions, if you will come along and say, okay, this physiological marker is now called deep sleep. And then there's this many stages. We're going to break it up. We're going to say that there's 4 stages, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to differentiate it by these kind of lines. And so what you have is a test that's being done, and then someone sitting in a chair, looking at a report and being like, okay, that's stage 1, that's stage 2. Like it's fairly subjective of what they're like crossing on the line of what is deep sleep. In addition to that, they change those criteria. So those criteria have been changed because, again, like they're not real things. They're sort of arbitrary.
Really?
Also, Yeah, of course.
There isn't strict criteria
More
for this is deep
importantly,
sleep. People say increased release of growth hormone. REM sleep is more for dreams, heavier on dreams and psychological repair. People say deep sleep more for muscular repair, etc.
those aren't wrong per se. It's like at the highest level, it's not entirely wrong. But the idea of being able to then say you had this many minutes in deep sleep, that's good or bad, is very close to wrong, right? Because that's kind of being arbitrarily scored. Number two, all we have is population-based data on that. I don't know what actually is good or bad. We know what the average person's deep sleep looks like, but I don't know what you particularly need because that demand is different every day depending on what you did cognitively and physically. And so then taking, especially if you're extending this to like a tracker and you're using a wearable and you're looking at the amount of minutes and time you spent in each stage, and then you're doing something about it, you're taking a supplement, you're taking a drug to try to change that, now we've run into real problems because all we've really done is taken inaccurate data from an inaccurate device. And now we're making life and drug and pharmaceutical decisions based upon that. All we did is look at the time. We didn't actually look at the depth within that. That's what actually matters. It's the amplitude within deep sleep, not the time domain per se. So that's what I mean. Like those things, like they tell us like very, very, very little, unless you have a massive, massive clinical sleep disorder. So the analogy I'll give you here is imagine you were out riding your bike or something and you got into a wreck, got hit by a car, and your knee is pointed the wrong direction and you're like, oh my God. And you go to a hospital and they put you in an x-ray machine. And they look and they go, oh, wait, well, Rav, your knee's pointed the wrong way. It's swollen up. You can't move it, but there's no broken bones. So your leg is fine. That's a clinical sleep study. When it's like, well, wait a minute, how about the fact that my ACL is torn, my PCL is torn, my kneecap is dislocated, I've got broken capillaries in there. They can't see that. They're looking for, do you hit this criteria for a sleep disorder, yes or no? And if you don't, then you're going to be told your sleep is fine. Or you're only like slightly broken boned. Like, great. They're not able to get into any of the further analysis. They can't get into the depth that's appropriate. And they can't tell you why it's happening. Right? So, okay, yes, my sleep is terrible. Why? Psychological, physiological, biochemical, environmental, habits, behavior. What is happening here, right? They're just simply being, well, no broken bones, good luck. And anyone that's ever gone to a sleep clinic is going to tell you that's basically been, or they're going to say, take a CPAP, which, again, I'm not against CPAP, but like that's the only answer that they generally have. It's like, you do or don't have sleep apnea, and then here's a CPAP machine.
So you're saying deep sleep and REM sleep are not actually distinguishable stages? You think that those aren't actually real?
Well, they are, according to the criteria, but those criteria are just, so people sat in a room and said, this is going to be the criteria for that. So that's is what they are. But they're not, what I'm pushing back on is they're not fundamentally telling you that much unless they are really bad. Really, really bad. And then they're just giving you insights. Hey, you have a broken bone. Great. But just because your sleep stages are fine, it doesn't mean you don't have dysfunctional sleep. And so it's not like if you are in a medical test and they tell you have 6 minutes of deep sleep, then I promise you have sleep problems. For sure. Yeah. Right. It's the other end of the spectrum, though, where it's like medium, moderate. If there's some other problem, what's the depth of the architecture there? How deep did you get into those stages? That stuff is what matters much more. What was your oxygenation look like? What was your respiratory rate?
Interesting. Okay.
What was your movement patterns look like? That's how you actually determine somebody's sleep. And so simply looking at a sleep stage on a tracker and then making assessments about your sleep is a really poor approach to sleep.
Gotcha. So you're not saying that you don't think deep sleep and REM sleep are distinguishable states. You're just saying it kind of misses the point.
Oh, they are for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Just to be clear.
I mean, they're definitely different things. No question.
Gotcha.
100%. It would be like this if I said, hey, look, I'm going to go through your business documents and I want to look at your profits, your income and your expenses. Well, yes, they're different for sure. They're different. But if all I ever did was look at income expenses, and I would say, okay, your income's too low. Like that's your business advice? Okay. Like, no, like what types of incomes do we have? What are like, oh, you're right. You get the idea, right? Like there's lots of different ways. And I don't know if it's an income issue or if it's an expense issue. When I get an expense, you're like, well, that actually was an expense, but that was actually a marketing. Like, well, what are expenses? Like, so there's not just like expenses. There's not income and expenses. That's kind of what these things are going to do. Like income expenses, they're balanced, so you're good to go. You're only losing a little bit of money. Don't worry about it.
Right.
I don't want to lose money. Nah, it's just a little bit. Don't worry about it. Like,
yeah,
that's the easiest way to explain this. It's like, yes, they're real for sure.
Gotcha.
But there's much more going on there than just like I had X amount of dollars in and X amount of dollars out.
Right. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Yeah, and the best sleep communicators that I see, like Matt Walker, the 6-part series he did with Huberman, went a lot more deeper into just that simple calculations that sometimes people do based on their tracker of sleep, of deep sleep versus REM sleep. I think people like Matt Walker go a lot deeper into the deeper nuances and complexities within that, which I find.
Yeah, he's great. He's fantastic.
Yeah. I had a lot more questions for you, including what any particular issues that you've changed your mind about, but I know you have to go here. So maybe we'll do it again if you're available, but really appreciate your time. This has been really educational.
Awesome, man. It was great to connect.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for watching, and be sure to check out Andy's information in the links in the description, including his sleep company and blood work tests, etc. We'll leave all that below. All right.
Has the dust settled from the COVID policy response? Far from it. The storms are many. Inflation, learning losses, ill health, high crime, broken government services, displaced workers, substance abuse, mass loneliness, discredited science, real estate crisis, censorship, and overweening state power. The world is on fire with war, mass killings, crime, hunger, revolution. The lack of accountability, or even so much as an apology, is a foreshadowing. They'll keep their newfound powers and try it all again. Brownstone Institute is seeking answers, undertaking important research and publishing the results while providing fellowships for dissident scholars who have been professionally displaced. It's not about this one crisis. We urgently need to restore peace, prosperity, and integrity in science and journalism. Visit brownstone.org for more. We may never get to the truth, but we can get closer to the truth. There will be no stopping the efforts.